I love the baking. I really do. But I probably spend 25% of my day every day talking to people. Like I said, the doors are open and everybody is welcome.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. After decades away from the commercial kitchen and in the limelight on our TV screens, Ed Halmagyi has been lured back into hospitality with his new bakery, Avners. After so long away from the day-to-day at the coalface, what's it like being in the industry again and at a time that is so challenging for many in food? Ed, it's great to get you on the show. How are you?
Mate, I'm good. It's, what are we recording at? It's like 10 past 2 in the afternoon for those who need the fourth wall broken down. But for me, that means I'm 12 hours into what's going to be a slightly longer day. But it's good. I'm great. I'm having a great time.
Well, hopefully you don't fall asleep while we're talking.
Nah, not at all. I'm loving it. Like I've found my place.
So the last couple of decades, we've seen your face on the television and celebrating food in a different way. What was this move back into the industry like, and why did you take the leap?
Well, look, I guess for me, the biggest thing was that it wasn't so much taking a leap as taking a step backwards. My first and most abiding love was always baking. I never meant to work in media. It was an accident of fate, a happy accident for a long time. I think towards the end of it, it was maybe slightly less so. But the thing that has always made me genuinely content as a human has been two distinct things. Firstly, creating beautiful baked food, but also hospitality in its truest sense. So forever telling young apprentices and cooks and chefs and bakers, you're not in the food business, you're not in the wine business, you're not in the restaurant business, you're not in the bakery business, you're in the hospitality business. You're not selling them a babka, you're selling them a sense of happiness, a sense of joy. And that's what you have to create. And the opportunity to be able to do that in a more tactile way, for me, that's thrilling.
Well, that tactile sort of nature, the venue that you have, there's almost no barrier between sort of the kitchen and the customers, and there's that real connection and organic sort of movement going on. Tell us about the decision to first on the site and the creation of the space.
The site's interesting. So when I decided that it was something I wanted to do was to get out of TV and go back to cooking, more specifically to bakery, this wasn't the first concept that I wanted to pursue. The first thing I wanted to do was to work with the Australian Sustainability Council to set up Australia's very first 100% certified sustainable retail bakery. I put 2 years of work into that project, only to realise in the end that it wasn't doable. Not at the moment. It's just the financials do not add up. I mean, bakery is a very power-hungry business. And, I mean, you can put all the solar on a roof you want. I mean, it won't even power a convection oven. Forget deck ovens and all that other jazz and giant mixers and all the three-phase equipment. And given the margins as they are now, going through and finding every single certifiably sustainable ingredient, the thing that was immediately obvious is that here in Australia, sustainability is still so expensive, it's at a point where consumers won't pay for it. So that was a disappointing realisation after a couple of years of work. But I wasn't deterred, because the other thing that I've had in the back of my head for more than a decade was the idea of doing something that really celebrated my heritage. I just didn't know what it would be. And as is so common with myself, it's when the curveballs come along and life suddenly says, I don't think so, pal, that I tend to react I react decisively, but usually some of my best decisions, if I'm going to be honest.
Tell us about landing that site and diving into that vision.
Well, the site was interesting. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a massive nerd, like a quite serious A grade nerd. And I'm not talking your Dungeons and Dragons kind of nerd. No, no, no. I had girlfriends as a teenager. Um, what? I am a data and detail oriented person. I make informed decisions based on best information and best possible outcomes. And so um, when I wanted to find out where you would put a business like this, I went and saw my little brother, who's a mathematician, and got his help designing an algorithm that would enable me to mine the ABS census data from the last couple of censuses. Because for a successful bakery, you need to know what the parameters are. Now, if you're on a roadside frontage, you're essentially looking for people who walk, because drivers just won't stop, particularly if there's not good parking. You need to know what kind of disposable income you need. There's a lot of things. So essentially what we were looking for was an area that has more renters than mortgage holders, because mortgage holders are more susceptible to the vagaries of interest rate changes. We wanted people who have a larger amount of professional employment and tertiary education, and who have travelled, because those people tend to be a bit more worldly in their choices and are more amenable to trying something different, particularly if they've spent some time in New York or Israel or Montreal. They'll have a greater realisation around what we're doing. We're looking for people who have higher pet ownership. The reason being that in Australia, by and large, that means dogs. And people walk dogs, which means they walk past your business. You want more kids in primary school rather than high school, because parents buy treats for primary school kids, less so for high school kids. I told you, I warned you, this is seriously nerdy.
I'm loving this. This is amazing.
So then what I did is I drew a pin at the Harbour Bridge and said, all right, let's take a 12-kilometre arc and see what we find. And suburb by suburb, we went through it. There were a few that sort of stood out. One was Chippendale, one was Marrickville, and another was Surrey Hills. Now, I have to say something controversial, and I'm sure there's people listening who are going to say that's a terrible generalisation, and perhaps it is, but generalisations are sometimes what you need to do when you're designing a business, because you're making general choices. Chippendale didn't work for me because one of the other things we looked at was the proportion of residents who were either born overseas or their parents were born overseas. 70% of the residents of Chippendale are born overseas, which is neither here nor there. I think it's wonderful that we're so multicultural. But one of the things about East Asian communities is they don't eat a lot of bread. It's more of a rice and noodle culture, which is fantastic. That's what I eat. But I'm looking for people who are hungry for bread. So I had to make that choice. And so while we'd found a great site in Chippendale, it wasn't going to work for me. Marrickville found a great location there. It's an old butchery. And old butcheries, if you want to start a bakery, they are amazing. They've got lots of three-phase power. It's all hosable. They're nice and sturdy. The location didn't sing for me. This location here in Surrey Hills on the corner of Burke and Albion, I had seen pretty much in the first week that I started looking. And I just thought to myself, it's a really old building and it's expensive. But as I looked around, what I realised is that there is no cheap rent in Sydney anymore, commercially. And the idea is not to try and save your way to success. That's not saving your way to success. That's saving your way to surviving. But rather put yourself in a position where you can create something of value, of importance to its community, and something with some longevity. We managed to negotiate down the rent a little bit, not a lot. It's still very expensive, but it's a beautiful old building. And, I think we're managing to tame it piece by piece.
What was it like for you delving into your heritage? And I know that you're an accomplished chef and pastry chef as well, but diving into that sort of area, were there things that you learnt and stories you can share about that?
I've learned a lot about both Hungarian and Jewish cookery over the years. I guess one of the things to keep in mind is that my family, while they were refugees from, well, refugees several times. I mean, they're refugees after the Holocaust, refugees after the Hungarian Revolution, and earlier at the end of World War One, they were refugees after the borders between Hungary and Romania were redrawn, and they were forced to abandon their villages and move westwards. But by the time they got to Australia, my grandparents and my father, they didn't want to talk about Hungary anymore. They were done with it. They very much left it behind. They still had a real love for and celebration of European culture, as in music, art, writing, but not for the land or the place from which they'd come. They'd go back. I mean, my grandmother ended up going back a couple of times, as did my grandfather. My dad's been back a few times, but they really did leave it behind. And so, as a kid, I learnt no Hungarian. As for the Jewish part, you got to put this into context of the enormous, enormous extended family and community that my grandmother's family, my grandfather's family existed in. Barely a dozen survived the war. Between May and August of 1944, 80% of Hungary's Jews were transported to Auschwitz and murdered. Some survived, a very small number survived as workers. But, this was, as a proportion of the community to be destroyed, it's really only Hungary and Poland. And so they didn't talk about that either, which I understand, but I think it's sad. I could have learned a lot from my grandmother, I think in particular, about whom there is several histories written about the extraordinary work she did to save people while at Auschwitz and Birkenau. She was an amazing woman. I can't stress enough the degree to which she was the most remarkable person I have ever known in my life. Someone who changed me more than anyone else. But the point I was trying to get to is that she couldn't cook to save herself. I mean, she was truly abhorrent at a stovetop. But, she grew up as a middle-class doctor. She had a housekeeper. She had a cleaner. She had a cook. She arrived in Australia having never cooked a meal in her life and suddenly had to go and work out how to do this thing. And let's just say after, 50 years, she hadn't quite got there. I'll never forget later in her life, I just drop in and see her all the time. I loved this woman. I loved her. And I'd just drop in and see her, and you'd catch her on the sly in her kitchen eating a can of lentils out of the can, cold. And she said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "But I'm hungry." "Can't you do that?" She said, "Oh, I don't care." So it's interesting counterpoint with what I chose to do for a living. But, yeah.
So when it came to sort of putting together the menu, were you familiar with all of the sort of baked goods from a making sense rather than just an eating sense?
My fascination runs at several levels. I think, as I said earlier, the hospitality of it really does matter to me, and so that's key. And maybe actually, it's a slightly long-winded way to answer your question, but maybe it's the most accurate and most informative. I consider myself to be selling three products, three tranches of products. The first is beautiful food and drink, and it's Jewish food. Secondly, I'm selling a visual representation of what it is to be Jewish in Australia in the 21st century. It's a vibrant, lively, loving, hospitable, generous, academically inclined, welcoming place, which I think represents the core values of the Australian Jewish community, regardless of what might happen in politics overseas at any given moment. We are not Israel. We are not some war happening overseas. We are Australians. And I think it's important to stand up and be a representation of what those wonderful values are. And lastly, I wanted to create a sense of genuine community. That's the third product we sell. We open the doors. When I get in 2 a.m. in the morning, I open the doors to the bakery, not to the shop side, but to the bakery side. And they don't close until we switch off the lights in the evening. And at any time of the day or night, people can just wander in, have a chat, move on, grab a chair and sit down and eat their breakfast. Or, you'll see, we're on Burke Street, mate. You'll see, we're just down from Taylor Square. You will see drunk chicks, falling over on the street. You go and pick them up, get them a chair, get them some water, have a chat, make sure they're safe to get home. It's a community thing. I like people to think about it as much as their living room as my kitchen. And so when you think about it within those three criteria, designing the menu actually became reasonably easy. The fundamental principle that defines what I do is that if you eat it here, we make it here. Everything. The lox, the pastrami, the pickles, the sauerkraut, the condiments, the amber, everything. If we are going to serve it to you, it's because we made it for you. And that is a genuine point of difference. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more expensive to do. But I think it reflects the love that sits behind the concept as a whole. It's a form of generosity. It has its ups and downs because it makes for some training challenges and some production challenges. But there's nothing quite like the feeling you get watching someone sitting outside in the afternoon sunshine, tucking into one of our Locke's bagels. And they sort of stop. And you see them, they hold it out in front of them, as if they're short-sighted. So what is this? And you just see this contentment. I'm not after people to be dancing down the street. You can knock yourselves out. You can do it if you want. But I just want people to have that real sense of inner joy. And I think part of it comes from a concept we used to talk about in restaurants a lot, which is the experiential difference. So if someone comes into an extra high fine dining restaurant and they come in with their expectations set to 95 out of 100 and you deliver them 95 out of 100, they leave going, yeah, that's pretty good. It was exactly what I thought it would be. You deliver them 99 out of 100 and they're like, well, yeah, it was a little bit better than I expected. It's so almost impossible to wow people when your expectations are that high. When the feel of the place is very casual, very welcoming, but very casual, and you bring, to all the chefs listening to this, come on in and try the lox. Then tell me you think you do better. I'm sorry, but I've had people who I fundamentally respect, love, and admire in our industry, who all agree that this. I learned this technique from a mate of mine who I think you know, Jeff Schroeder. Jeff's a really good guy. He was actually just here. I was having a chat with him. He taught me the basics of the technique and I've refined it to do it the way I want to do it. I will happily teach it to anybody, professional or otherwise. I don't believe in keeping secrets. I think the more people doing great stuff, the better the industry is as a whole. Come and try it. You will be amazed. It is as promised, or more so. And so you come into a place very casual, very easy to approach price point, and you are served something that is well beyond what you imagine. That's the joy. And that's the thing I want to do.
Tell us about your career in the industry. Many people know you from the television, but you had a long career in the industry before that all happened. Where did you get your foot in the door, and do you have any stories of what it was like in the sort of beginning?
Okay, so I was what I think Plato once described in one of his philosophies as a bloody shit of a child. I got kicked out of more high schools than most people can imagine. And after I got kicked out of my second high school, my father, who was really quite rightly at a bit of a loss, told me one Saturday morning, I can't do this anymore. Go out and get a job. Don't come home until you've got a job. And so I went for a walk near where we lived and was a bit confused as to how one gets a job, but I ended up walking into like a bakery cafe and, I don't suppose you guys have any jobs going. As it happened, they needed a kitchen hand, and so I started right there and then, Saturday morning. It's actually a pretty easy job. And I say that with all due respect to all the incredible kitchen hands I've worked with. It's not that it's not a hard-working job. It's a very hard-working job, but it's not a complex job. And so I was able to pick it up even at that age. Within a month, I'd started helping the bakers and the chefs. And within 3 months, I was sort of holding down a section just because, they needed someone, and it's easier to hire another kitchen hand than it is easier to hire a junior on junior wages who can actually cook. So before you know it, I'm sort of knee deep in this thing, and it was a really transformative moment for me because the anger and frustration and deliberately poor decision making I had in the rest of my life kind of abated a bit because, as I explained it to so many people, I didn't find a job. I found a tribe. It makes all the world a difference. I found a bunch of people who could be very rough around the edges, could be very ill-disciplined, but who were doing something fundamentally creative and interesting and who did it. I was lucky that the people I worked for at first genuinely did it because they liked the idea of doing something good for people. It was, it taught me so much. I still managed to get kicked out of 2 more high schools, but that's, by the by. So I continued to work all the way through high school. I moved out pretty much the day I left high school, and so I went off to. I did pretty well at school, and I went off to do an arts law degree at Sydney Uni. But I had to pay my way through life, and so I was working full time and doing a double degree, which was interesting. I still did really well at uni. You know, um, okay, momentary brag. I don't normally do bragging. I think it's a really lazy way of living, but I did win. I did win the university medal in history in my first year, which is you don't win the university medal in first year. The only point I'm trying to make is I was good at this stuff. I loved the academics of it, and I loved the storytelling of it. History and law are both forms of storytelling, where you take a set of data and a string of information sequences, and you craft them into a narrative, whether to win an argument or to present a version of events. Yeah, that would, of course, become quite useful in my career to come. I dropped out of uni, not because I didn't like it. I was loving uni, but I was doing law at Sydney Uni, surrounded by privileged, entitled, lower North Shore blue blood assholes. And I knew that if I finished my degree, I would end up spending my life with these people. And quite frankly, that is something I could do without. And I say that with all due respect to the many lower North Shore blue blood privileged entitled assholes who are out there listening. I am talking about you. Um, take a good look at yourself, kids. Uh, I wanted to do something of more value. I didn't know what that would be. I loved intellectual property law and constitutional law. I didn't like the more rote stuff like contract and industrial. It didn't get me, but the esoteric stuff, yeah, really did. But anyway, I walked out of the dean's office at the old Phillip Street Law School, and I was making my way down Martin Place, and there was an organisation that did community development work overseas who were doing a fundraiser. I was a bit interested. No, what's going on? Sounded pretty cool. They go to these countries, they build schools, they do water cleanliness programs, they help treat diseases, they help run dental programs, all sorts of stuff. That sounded like something worth doing. There was one coming up in the Solomon Islands. I signed up, and 3 months later, I was in Honiara. And that was amazing. That really was. It taught me an enormous amount. I think one of the things, I mean, other than the cultural part of it, one of the things I learned that really shaped my life, and any young blokes listening to this, maybe just consider this for a moment. We were doing some training before we went, and one of the training exercises was emergency management in case something went wrong. And so we were actually in the Megalong Valley, and we had to get a line across a river and then get an injured person across a river. And so there was myself and a couple of other guys, sort of my size. I'm 6'6", big guy, was a competitive rock climber. I could look after myself. And so, of course, big man, we went across the river, took rope. Not butch or, trying to show off or anything, but just it seemed like we were the right people to do that part of the job. And we probably were. I mean, it's like, it's okay. Everybody has different things to bring to the equation, and everybody was. It was really good. But then Matt and I came back, and the patient was a young girl called Lisa, and we said to Lisa, "Okay, listen, we've made a little seat. We've put together with a carabiner a bit of a rope crossing. We're going to put you in the seat. Hold on tight, and we'll get you across the river." And we lift her up, put her in the seat, and get her across the other side. And then slowly, one by one, we get everyone across, and last person comes with the rope. Pretty successful until we get to the other side, and the person running the exercise tells Matt and I that we failed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, we totally nailed that. He says, no. You failed because you didn't do the most important part of the exercise. Keep in mind that you're going to be doing this very probably in the Solomon Islands, which is a very different culture. And when you lifted Lisa up, you didn't either ask permission to lift her, you didn't check that she was comfortable with being touched by a man, and you didn't ask whether she would like to be lifted by somebody else. That lesson has stuck with me right through life and in kitchens. And the point is not necessarily the gender dynamics, although they're essential. The point that really stuck with me is that when you're a tall, white, capable guy, before you go and do something with other people, maybe shut up for a minute and ask questions first. And that was such a good lesson to learn at that age. Because, I guess I'm probably a lot like you. I mean, you've crafted a life for yourself, Anthony. You've made a career for yourself. You're a very capable, intelligent man, and often that means that you and I and people like us, we do things often without necessarily realizing that while other people may be very happy for us to do it, we do have to ask first. And I think that was one of the real clarifying moments for me, because when I came back from there and went to work in kitchens again, the first thing I realised was that I was surrounded by people who were very different to me, and finding ways to be inclusive with them was perhaps the most important thing I would do.
You've worked at quite a few venues. What were the really sort of important venues that you worked at through your career as you started to build it?
If you go around Australia and you go through, I don't know, say the top 100 restaurants currently, and you have a look at the senior team in the kitchens and on the floor, I would say there's a 1 in 3 chance that at least someone in those groups at some stage worked in one of Neil Perry's establishments. I think Neil's greatest contribution to our industry is not necessarily his cooking, which is excellent, but the degree to which he has trained such extraordinary numbers of people and done so extraordinarily well. I was privileged to work for the Rockpool Group. If I never had to make another date tart or passion fruit souffle again, I'd be a happy guy. Fucking tart. Oh my God. Can I tell you, look, the thing that was so insane about that, it's insane in both the really good and the really bad way, is that when you're making this pastry, it's not a friendly pastry to make. It doesn't want to hold together. And then at the very end, you put it in this ring, and then you curve the pastry inwards at the top above the line of the metal. And it has to be a perfect curve, otherwise it's not stable. And then you freeze it, and with a scalpel, you have to get the pastry completely level on that top. So you're cutting it at an angle to the pastry, so that when you fill it with the date custard, the whole thing sits as one perfect line. Now, why? Because you can. By the time you have dessert at Rockpool and your 3 glasses of Chateau Margaux in, no one gives a shit, let's be honest. But the disciplined attention to detail and quality that Neil's entire approach to cookery has engendered in a generation of cooks and chefs is unequaled. That, because once you understand that that's something that can be valuable, it's something you then teach to others. It's not necessarily that someone was a chef de partie for him. It's the fact that someone was a chef de partie for him and then had 2 chef de parties for them. It is a form of knowledge that rolls downhill like an avalanche, growing with speed. And the reality, perhaps, is that in a generation, people, young kids, go, Neil, who? What? Who's this guy you're talking about? Ponytail? Whatever. But that doesn't mean his influence will be any less for it. I think Neil's an extraordinary Australian who has delivered so much, and I was really privileged to work with him. One of the other places that I did enjoy working was down at Otto Nove at Woolloomooloo, which is where I first came into contact with media. But beyond the fact that it was just incredibly rapid, I was able there to put into practice the thing which I was just talking about, really believing, which is the idea of inclusivity. I found a way to employ not just a lot of apprentices, but to employ apprentices from the margins, young people who otherwise could not get a job, but who had that little glint in their eye. Sometimes it presented as anger or frustration. Sometimes they were a little bit broken. Or sometimes they're just curious and shy. But other people didn't want them. And the thing about so many of those young people, particularly if they've come from deeply problematic backgrounds, and there's a couple I'm thinking of specifically who, when you found out their story, you go home and you weep for a bit that the world does that to young people. I can't change their background or their past, but I can change their future. And the vast majority of them, after spending a year or 2 with us, went on, whether they went on to cookery careers or not, many did, they went on to be much happier people. And as far as I'm concerned, that was a real win. And with that in mind, that particular job gave me the opportunity to work with Restaurant and Catering Australia, with John Hart, who was running it at the time, to really invest in the time needed and the resources required to fix some parts of the apprenticeship system, to recognise that people don't go into it equal, that, not everybody is a young Marco Pierre White. There are some people, when you first went to kitchen, they're hopeless. They don't have any skills. But isn't that what being an apprentice is? You go in there because you don't know anything and you go there to learn. And if you're not prepared to teach people and accept that people learn at different rates, you just shouldn't be teaching. That it's a very simple relationship. I value apprenticeships. I value the role of being a teacher. And that job gave me that opportunity, hand over fist. And, to be honest, it's what I'm doing now, Anthony. I do not have a single baker or chef working in my kitchen. Not one. I've got JP, who has owned cafes most of his life and is kind of between spots at the moment, hoping that maybe he'll get a cafe for himself later in the year. He's been with me for 9 weeks and is now running the bake all on his own. Viv gave up work in emergency medicine at Royal North Shore Hospital as a doctor because she'd kind of burnt out and wanted to do something that made her feel happy again, and is an extraordinary young pastry chef really picking it up. Corolla, who's come to us from Mexico, I mean, we hired her as a kitchen hand, and it really became evident very quickly that not only was it well and truly beyond her, but she was very frustrated. When you bother to ask, she's one of Mexico's most celebrated industrial designers specializing in mass production of jewelry. What the hell is she doing scrubbing my pans? And so I'm teaching her how to bake, because people like that, you can teach them anything. You just have to take the time and have the respect. And now I've gone and made the mistake of hiring Max. Now, Max is from Argentina. And the problem with Max is that, well, Max is a biochemical engineer with an extraordinary business background. No. You know, stop seeing them by their limitations of language or visa condition, but see them for what they can bring to your business. But perhaps the most lovely part of it for me has been that my son kind of struggled with school quite badly. There was some talk about him. He was thinking about joining the Navy. He wanted to do cyber warfare operations. That didn't work out for him, and so he went off to TAFE and found the nearest possible thing he could study, which would take him down the same sort of track, which of course is fashion design. Um, but so yeah. So he's doing 3 days a week down at Ultimo TAFE, which is literally at the bottom of the hill. So he stays here a few nights a week. There's an apartment above, which is great. My commute's 30 seconds. Awesome. And he does Tuesdays with me. And not only is it so lovely to spend time with my 18-year-old son, who's just an absolutely charming kid, but the speed at which he picks up these particular skills is not only heartwarming for me, but it gives him a real sense of accomplishment and pride. And that's something I have such incredible value for. I have a whole new sense of who my son is. I really do. I do. If you take the time to respect people for what they can bring, and you give them the opportunity and the tools with which to succeed, the world can be a truly wonderful, wonderful place. I really enjoy that.
After sort of so many years away from hospitality or from the coalface of hospitality, how different is it running a business now compared to back then? And also, how different is it for you having had that time away from it?
It's definitely different for me. I think it's more terrifying now than it used to be, because I'm more aware of the downside risk than I used to be. I mean, you used to be able to kind of cocksure and just go, "Yeah, come on, man." The biggest changes, employment conditions, wages are huge. Now, I both love and fear that. I think you cannot expect people to work in a hospitality industry, particularly in urban areas where they have to pay urban costs like the rest of us, and then pretend that giving them a fraction of that employment return is either reasonable or ethical. It's just not. No one's going to tell me even that, so we come under the General Retail Industry Award rather than hospitality. So for casuals, I think it's $30.90 something an hour, Monday to Friday base for casuals. Now, that's a bit of money, but are you going to make your fortune doing that? No, you're not. You're going to get by, have a few extra bucks in your pocket for a drink or two on the weekend, but there's not a fortune to be made. Life's expensive at the moment. My ambition at the moment is to build a structure of a business that can succeed into the future, while not expecting that it needs to be enormously profitable immediately. I have to understand that those costs are what they are, and we are finding ways to ameliorate them over time. But you have to believe in your staff, and you have to look after them and make sure they get every single thing they're entitled to. Merivale, sorry. But that cough keeps coming back, sorry. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You either respect your staff or you don't. You want to teach them or you don't. You look after them or you don't. There's no middle ground on that. Find a way to make it work. You can't save your way into a successful business. You have to earn your way to a successful business. So focus on that and stop quibbling over, the overtime. That's my attitude. So the weight is the one huge change. I think the availability of produce has become so much better. The range of things you can get, is vastly improved. It's more expensive, but we can get things that we would never have access to before. And you don't have to get all of it through wholesale distributors either. The little incidental things that we need, like, for example, one of the things we need is food-grade caustic soda, and we need it in volume. Now, I suppose I could go to BOC or some chemical person, whatever. Alternately, you can go onto eBay. It's there. It's with you next day at the same price, but only 2 kilos at a time. That wasn't, you couldn't do that 10 years ago. It just wasn't available. And, for anyone who wants to learn about making a bagel, and it is actually a fairly technical thing. I'll just drop in. I'll happily show you. I don't have secrets. Like I said, you want to learn, come spend a day with us. But some of the things you need, very, very hard to get. Some of it's technique, some of it's ingredient, most of it's technique. But that's really changed. The availability of ingredients, that's definitely changed.
Well, it's incredible to see you back and with the venue that's so busy and become a part of the community. What are you loving about what you're doing?
I love the baking. I really do. But I probably spend 25% of my day every day talking to people. Like I said, the doors are open and everybody is welcome. It'll be, fans of the show. They want to come and say, like, sure. Not many, but there's some. It's septuagenarians who want to fix their recipe for date slice and need some advice. It's South African Jewish grandmothers who come along and say, "Oh, I don't understand why it is that you do this. Now, my matzo ball soup, I don't make it like that, my friend. Now, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not how I do it, eh?" It's not bad, is it? It's not bad. And to all the South African Jewish grandmothers listening, that is what you sound like. I'm just saying. But, actually, the matzo ball soup, oh, my God, I've loved this. It's one of those dishes that everybody has an emotional connection to. If you're Jewish, you have an emotional connection to matzo ball soup. And that idea that you grew up with is either pitifully awful, that's a very small minority, or it's what you think is definitional. And so I have to accept that I can please maybe 10% of the people who order it. That's it. And beyond that, I just don't care. It is a really fantastic matzo ball soup we're making. It is genuinely brilliant. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you, it is a beautifully made 12-hour chicken broth, slow cooked chicken thigh for the shredded meat. I include carrots and celery because I love their blanched crispness. And the matzo balls I make, I can tell you that it is 1 part extra virgin olive oil, 2 parts coarse matzo meal, and 4 parts egg. A little bit of salt, and one other very secret ingredient that, God, do I tell you? No, I'm not going to tell you. The ratio is the ratio. And for all the Jewish grandmothers listening right now going, but where's the schmaltz? There's no schmaltz in it. Schmaltz, of course, being chicken fat. I don't put chicken fat in it because I like the lighter feel of the extra virgin olive oil. Now, is it abhorrently changed? Maybe. Is it delicious? Absolutely. But you don't have to just be delicious for things to be enjoyable. They have to resonate with you emotionally. And my challenge is, over time, if I can, in a 12-month period, just convert one 80-year-old Moldovan synagogue attendee, I think that'll be a success.
Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you today. And I know you've got so many more stories, so we'll have to catch up again down the track. But please keep in touch and good luck with everything. We'll catch up again soon.
It's entirely my pleasure. And just one little shout out to all of the young chefs who are listening to this, and I hope there's plenty of them. For starters, you've done a really good thing. You're listening to intelligent conversations about food, and there is no better way to learn your craft than to engage in those conversations. But I always tell you, you need to learn new skills and techniques. So if there's any young chefs who want to learn anything at all about Jewish bakery, my door is always open and you're always welcome. Look us up online, give me a call.
Wow, what an offer. That is amazing. Mate, you're a legend. Good to catch up again.
All right, mate.
We'll talk soon.
Take it easy. All right, cheers.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.